subjects to somewhat less STEM-related subjects now. And so we're happy to have Dr. Selina Ho, who is an assistant professor in international affairs at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, who is also co-director of the Center of Asia and Globalization at LKY, SPP. So Dr. Ho is an expert on Chinese politics and foreign policy. She obtained a PhD and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University and graduated from NUS with a BA history. So today she'll be telling us more about infrastructure and Chinese power, insights from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Selina, all yours.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you all for inviting me to this open house. I'm really pleased to be here to share some of the projects that I've been doing. Can I share my screen, please? Thank you. Hold on a second. All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good. I think you can go into full screen mode if you like.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Just want to make sure that, yeah. Okay. All right. Does this look good? Okay. Thank you so much again for being here. And I'm very pleased to answer questions after this. So primarily, I'm a China scholar, as Jessica said, and I work on specifically on the idea of Chinese power and how one should understand Chinese power. So within this realm that I work in, I actually look at infrastructure, and specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about my book. This is a cover of my book called Rivers of Iron, Railroads and Chinese Power to Southeast Asia. And I want to look at the implications of how China projects power through railroads and through infrastructure generally. So this is in a way part and a parcel of China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's something that people hear quite often regularly in the last few years. So we ran this project it's a multi-year project, and I'll talk a little bit more about our methodology in a while. But let me begin by showing what this whole project is about. So this book was published in 2020, right smack in the middle of COVID. But we managed to do our field work before that, so that's great. We managed to complete our field work before that. But let me look at the project itself. So this is a map of the proposed and planned high-speed railway. So when we say high-speed railway, we generally talk in the upper 200s to 300s. But actually, the plans here in some of these countries are more in the 160 kilometers per hour kind of range. So more medium speed, but generally they are called high-speed railway because that was the aim. It's just that the realities on the ground became something more medium speed. But you can ask me about that later on. So this is, some of it is being built, some of it has been built, but it is generally, and then some of it is just in the plan stage and just talking stage. So things are still moving.
Sorry, Selina, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I think we're in the presenter view. Maybe you can switch to the regular view.
How do I do that?
That's a good question.
Because I share screen, so you mean you're not looking at the slides?
No, we are, which is probably okay, but we're actually looking at your presenter view. But I think it's fine. If we cannot figure it out in real time, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay, I think I just approved somebody to take care of my slides.
Okay, sorry about that.
Was that you?
No, it wasn't, but I think it was my colleague. So.
Okay, so should I switch to whatever view it was supposed to be? How do I do that?
You try the display settings. There you go. Yeah, that one, the first one.
Okay, are we good now?
Super. We're good. Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. You saved me. So let me go back to the other slide, which is I'm trying to explain this map here. So essentially, the vision is one that is of three routes. One is through the central part, which will run through Laos. One is through the east, which will run through Vietnam and Cambodia, and the other part will run through Myanmar. So the only part that is really under consideration now is the central route. So the idea is to build from a high-speed railway from Yunnan in southern China, all the way down across the border to Laos, to Vientiane, crossing the border into Thailand to Bangkok. And so this portion, the portion that is in Vietnam has already been, in Laos has already been built. It's been operational since December last year. The portion that is in Thailand is still being built. Okay, it's very slowly being built. And then this part all the way down to Malaysia and Singapore is just talking. If you recall from your reading about newspapers, there has been this going on about, you know, whether we should go ahead with this high-speed railway between KL and Singapore. That project was put on hold or cancelled when the new government came in under Mahathir Mohamad, and then subsequently the other governments after him. But recently, Malaysia has talked about reviving this project again. So we're still in an uncertain stage about this one and whether it will happen. But essentially, we're talking about this central route that is being built, and that's where most of our fieldwork was being carried out. The research questions I have for this project is, how should we understand power and Chinese power? And then how does domestic politics affect foreign policy decisions and behavior? I think one of the key things that we need to remember is that foreign policy decisions do not occur in a vacuum, but that domestic politics and whatever is happening within the country has a huge impact on the kind of foreign policy decisions that leaders make. And then the other thing is, what are the roles of small states in international politics? And this is something that we are concerned about. Being here in Singapore, a small state, how should we understand the role of small states, and what can small states do? Are small states just, you know, they have to just do what the great powers want, or do we just are we able to exercise some agency of our own, that we actually have a role to play in international politics, and how much control do we have of our external environment? So this is our methodology. This is a picture of the kind of things we were doing out in the field. This is in Laos. You can't really tell from this picture because it's in black-white, but the mud is actually red. It was after a rain. And so we were walking through all these red mud areas where the construction site is. This is me and my co-authors. We did this as a multi-year project. It took us 3 to 4 to 5 years or so of field work that's done through the school holidays. And the field is across 8 countries, Southeast Asia plus China. If you include the United States as well, that would be 9 countries. So Southeast Asian countries and China. And then what we did was that we do more than 200 interviews. So and we allow the interviewees, the people that we interview, to speak for themselves in our book. And these people that we interviewed actually came from about 150 organizations. So these more than 200 interviews were people who are government leaders, business leaders. There are people in NGOs, civil society, or even, you know, a very simple, straightforward thing like we go and talk to we go to a train station and we talk to the train master and ask what's going on here, are things being built, what are the problems here, you know, and that kind of situation. So we and in our book, which I have it here, we actually let the interviewers, the people who interviewed, the interviewees, speak for themselves. We have a lot of nice quotes in there. So the vision of this Pan-Asia Railway, where did it come from? What were the debates? I mean, you know, it has to come from somewhere. Whose vision was it in the first place? Well, actually, you know, we think of China building all these infrastructure projects in the Belt and Road Initiative and all around us. We think, you know, that it came from China, but actually not. Okay, the project, the vision did not come from China. In fact, it was something that started with in the early 20th century with the British and French colonists. They have this vision and thinking, starting to think about a Pan-Asia railway, not necessarily a high-speed one, but a Pan-Asia railway that linked all the different parts of mainland Southeast Asia, right down to the continent, the maritime portion, which is Malaysia and Singapore. The reason is because, you know, railways are great for transporting goods, for linking up people, for transporting people, and as well as, you know, it serves military purposes as well. So the French and British colonists were the first one to actually think about it. And later, the Japanese thought about it. The Japanese during the World War II Japanese occupation part, they also thought about it. But then later, it was actually ASEAN itself. ASEAN and former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, they were the key proponents of this Pan-Asia Railway vision. But Southeast Asia at that time did not have the money. And so what they did was they looked to investors from outside, right? But there were no real investors because infrastructure are high risk, and people are reluctant to take up this project. It was only when China became richer, have the technology, because they have a very, very well-developed domestic train, high-speed railway industry right now. That was from years of development on their own. When China had the money and when China had the technology and the skills and the materials, after 2000, this vision actually began to take off. So there were all these bilateral negotiations between China and Laos, China and Thailand about all these this possibility of having this Pan-Asia Railway. So so the vision, to be clear, was not from China, by something that the region actually really wanted for itself. I mean, the idea was planted by the colonists, but it was something that Southeast Asian countries also wanted. And they went to China and asked China, do you want to invest and help us build this? So what was happening was, so it can only come about when China was actually have the resources, when it developed economically after 2000 or so. But even if the adoption of this vision was not without debate in China. Okay, so what were the debates there? Why should they do it? What are the risks and the potential losses that can happen, the costs, and then the benefits? So they have to weigh against that. There were conversations between the maritime people who prefer connectivity through the maritime route, and those who are continentalists. They want to build railways, roads, and highways. So, but this vision of the Pan-Asia Railway is really a kind of a compromise between the maritime specialists and the continentalists, because it joins the vision of it becomes a joint vision between those who prefer the continental land route and the maritime route, since it leads all the way to Malaysia and to Singapore. And the debates are not just within all these experts and elites, but they're also within Chinese society itself. Chinese society, they were talking about, the risks and the benefits and the costs. And why should China, as a developing country, help to invest in these infrastructure projects overseas when they can cost so much and there's so much risk? Why are we helping others when we should be helping ourselves? So if debates went on, and finally a decision was made, which was kind of a bottom-up one and a top-down one, to have this project. And in fact, this Pan-Asia Railway is very much state-directed. It is is actually built by these state-owned enterprises in China. So these were the debates. Where they come from? Now, this question to ask is, how did Southeast Asian countries respond to all these things? Well, Southeast Asian countries within themselves also started debating, right? They want this vision, but they all respond differently to this particular vision. Some are more receptive, some are more resistant, okay? So we develop a theoretical framework for this to explain why different countries develop differently, have different responses to Chinese approaches when it comes to infrastructure projects, generally speaking, and then specifically on the Pan-Asia Railway. So you have in one, it's a 2x2 table. So on one side, you have the relative degree of development-based legitimation. So what is the basis of legitimacy for the government, for the state? Are they based on promises of economic development, or are they based on, say, nationalism? Okay, so if you focus more on development, economic development as your basis of legitimacy, you will have high on one side, and then you have low on the other side. Okay, so and then the other 2x2 that we look at is a degree of power pluralization, meaning how dispersed the power is within a country. Is there power concentration? Is there like a is the prime minister or the president very powerful? Is the executive branch very powerful? Or is there a lot of power that's being dispersed? Many political parties, many different voices in parliament. So this will also impact the way that they reacted. So, I will just pick on one example in the interest of time. Looking at Laos, because Laos is one of my favorite cases to talk about. Very beautiful country, but very underdeveloped as well. So on the Laos case, we call it quadrant 1, and we call it enthusiastic embrace. Laos, that part, as I said just now, the China-Lao railway has already been built. So there was this basis of legitimacy in Laos is really about economic development because they're so underdeveloped. The government has to do something about developing their country. So there are promises that are made to the people, how to transform from a landlocked country to a land-linked country. So land-linked country meaning that they can go all the way down to the sea. Laos is completely landlocked. So the railway gives them this ability to link up right to the sea. And so that was one of the key reasons why there was great support at the high level, because it falls into the elite vision of how Laos should develop. And then the degree of power polarization is low because power is concentrated in one political party, which has ruled Laos since 1975. It's a communist party. It was a product of the Vietnam War, and it was. It's too complicated for me to tell the whole story here, but basically there's only one party that is in power. So that leads to, according to NIST metrics, with high degree of development-based legitimation and high power concentration and low degree of power polarization, that it's very likely that the country will actually embrace this project that is being developed by the Chinese Office of Investment and Money. So, but on the other hand, we also look at how in the process when China and the smaller states of Southeast Asia are bargaining, what are the conditions where small states actually have a role to determine their own fates, that they can actually have bargaining power vis-a-vis China, which is such a big and powerful country compared to all these smaller states around its borders, right? So one of the key things that we made the point of is that size, wealth, and location matter. So if you have middle powers like Thailand actually would have greater leverage than Laos, for example, in the bargaining. And then you have, and also geography actually favors Thailand. If you recall the map that I was showing just now, all the routes, so 3 routes that are being proposed, all will go through Thailand. So in a sense, Thailand would have a lot of bargaining power. If the Chinese want to build this, then Thailand is a key linchpin in the entire network. So in fact, in one of our interviews, a very poignant kind of quote that I have here of this government advisor that we actually interviewed in Thailand. This very important government advisor described Thailand as and I quote, a beautiful woman who can wait to choose the best suitor, meaning that it has all the advantages. It's just waiting for the right great powers with the money to come wooing at her doorsteps. So in a sense that it is a middle power. It has its location matters. So all these things help its bargaining power vis-a-vis all the major powers, including China. Now, state capacity is the other one. So secondary states, smaller states actually have more options when they have greater capacity. When I say state capacity, I mean like robust government institutions, civil society, rule of law, human resources, and the ability to regulate and to monitor. So I would say that Singapore has high state capacity, for instance, and is not overly dependent on China economically. Now, however, countries like Laos, very small country, with very little state capacity, they're heavily reliant on the Chinese economy and technical expertise. So for instance, when the feasibility study was being done for the China-Lao railway, the feasibility study was actually conducted by China. Now, an independent body should be conducting the feasibility study, or the Lao people themselves should be conducting the feasibility study, but they do not have the technical expertise. So, but it was conducted by China, and that makes the process of getting the deal become less transparent in that sense and less accountable in that sense. Now, the third factor that will affect the bargaining power of small states is domestic politics and public opinion. Domestic politics and public play a huge role in determining how much bargaining power small states have. So if you all recall, former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, who is now actually being thrown into prison for corruption, and current Indonesian President Jokowi, both men have actually been attacked for selling their countries to China, because both men were supporters and champions of infrastructure projects in their country. And essentially, these infrastructure investors are actually Chinese companies. So they were being criticized as selling their countries to China. There were concerns over whether local people will actually benefit in terms of technological transfer, job creation, and also Chinese companies, because Chinese companies often bring their own materials, their own labor into these recipient countries. So they end up sidelining local workers, local SMEs. So, the big question is, do the economies of these recipient countries actually benefit from Chinese investment in this railway project? There was also negative public opinion and unhappiness over Chinese presence. This is a racial, there's an ethnic racial element here because of the influx of Chinese workers. And there are some racial sensitivities in our neighboring countries. So in that sense, for the Southeast Asian countries, they actually end up having huge bargaining power when they talk to China because of these pressures, domestic opinion, domestic politics. All these are going to strengthen the bargaining power of Southeast Asian politicians. They can go to China and say, look, I'm putting my domestic position at risk. I have people who are not happy with this project. They think there are too many Chinese workers in the country. We're not sure whether our economy is benefiting. But here, we are all these risks that we're undertaking. So when we bargain with you, you have to give us more concessions. For those concessions will be in the form of, say, for instance, lower interest rates. Okay, so those are the kind of things that they are bargaining for. But the bargaining actually does not just end at negotiations. It actually happens in implementation as well. Without going into too much details, let me explain a little bit more about these 4 things that I have listed out here. So decentralization and land acquisition. So when Chinese companies, in this case railway companies, when they function in China, they are used to a particular system where the state can acquire land very quickly. They don't have to worry about local authorities. But when they go to Southeast Asia, it's not the same. There are multiple political actors. Local governments can be very powerful, and they can hold up land acquisition. Now in Thailand, there was some bureaucratic resistance as well, because and then what you saw was Prime Minister Prayut having to evoke an executive order to overcome some of these legal barriers and reluctance from the State Railway Authority of Thailand to allow the Chinese companies they actually make money from selling land, but they lose money on rail operations. So there's this bureaucratic resistance here. Now, political champions, I was talking about Najib. So when Najib went out of power, a strong supporter of Chinese projects like the East Coast Rail Link, was gone. So there was this period of time where when Mahathir came into power in 2018, he put the East Coast Rail Link project on hold, on freeze, even though it was, in the process of being built already. Obviously now things have gone on track again, because after that, the Malaysian government renegotiated with the Chinese companies, and they managed to move the project forward. Now, technical challenges is something that is very real. If you were to build, railways through tunnels, in Laos, you have to actually encounter a lot of mountainous regions. You have to dig through tunnels. So those technical challenges are real, and it will take time. So there are all these challenges that the Chinese meet when they go out to Southeast Asia, because it's not so straightforward that China can impose its will on the region, but that there are domestic considerations on the part of Southeast Asian countries, and there are also challenges when it comes to implementation. So this is my last slide. How should we understand Chinese power? I think we need to know that infrastructure is something that we see in the streets all the time. But we need to know that when we look at a train station, or when we look at a road, or we look at a railway track, we need to know that there is power infrastructure. Infrastructure is not just about economic development. It's also not even about security, military troop movements, because if you build railways in the past, when wars were being fought in the 19th and 20th century, railways play a big part in the logistical flow of goods and soldiers, right? So, but power is in infrastructure, so it's not just economic power and military power, but it's also about the power of ideas. And it also structures relationships. It can make asymmetrical, it can worsen asymmetrical relationships. Infrastructure is also about the power ideas. Let me give you an example. So when the Chinese go out and they talk about, to become rich is to build roads first. When we went to interview the Southeast Asian countries, that saying to get rich, you have to build roads first become a very common thing that we hear when we talk to the people. They believe in that power of that idea, that infrastructure can bring wealth. But we also know that infrastructure can lead to a lot of different problems, right? So if you borrow too much from China, you're going to fall into debt. Okay, borrow loans, you get loans. That's what's happening with Laos. You borrow too much from, if you don't have the money to build infrastructure, you borrow, you're going to end up in debt to China. And that can actually help, that can impact your sovereignty, your ability to make independent decisions. So one of the other things to note is Chinese power is multidimensional. It's not just economic and security, but there are also ideas and social dimensions to it. I can try to answer those questions shortly. And there are strengths and weaknesses of hegemonic states. So China is a hegemonic state in the sense it's a very powerful state economically and militarily. But they are very powerful, but they also have restrictions. There are limits to it. Smaller states can resist, modify, and constrain China. And China can only dominate smaller states to the extent there's acceptance of this asymmetry in relations that these smaller countries in Southeast Asia are willing to say that, yes, China is definitely more powerful than us, and therefore we should take this interest into account. And there has to be a correspondence. There must be agreement between Chinese ideas and values and the narratives of Southeast Asian elites in order for China to be able to dominate in the region. So China is powerful, but there are limits to what it can do in this region. Thank you very much.